BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Black Box Ned 88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And just a couple of quick announcements to drop first. We will be continuing our series on the Golden State Killer later this week. And I did say, though, that I was, after doing a couple uploads on the Zodiac Killer and some other serial killer stuff, that I was going to be getting to your requested topics, and that is one of them that we have here today. This is something that was suggested by one of the listeners. So if you have any suggestions for something that you would like covered on the channel, please drop it in the comments section below, and we'll try to get to it in the near future. Okay, and we're going back to 1974, very specifically April 9th of that year, because on that day, in the former Soviet Union, an individual named Aleksandr Pichushkin was born, and he would grow up to become one of the most famous serial killers in Russia, possibly the most prolific serial killer in Russia, but we aren't 100% sure, and there's some very big reasons for that. We did one upload on Aleksandr Pichushkin in the past, and there'll be a link to that in the description box. The best way you can support this channel is just by listening to some other content. We rely on your support, but never asking for any money. All you got to do is listen, and you can hear the original upload that we did in 2019 on Aleksandr Pichushkin. It's done in more of the pure podcast format, so what I like to do when I'm listening to YouTube podcasts, I like to put on the closed captions, and I find it's much more engaging. Okay. But some of the big things that we should say about Aleksandr Pichushkin is, because we've talked a lot more about serial killers in the last year and a half, so I think we've really gained some more insights. Aleksandr Pichushkin was someone who was growing up in Russia, fatherless for almost his whole life. He had a major head injury as a kid. Very specifically, he was sitting on a swing, what I guess we would call in America like a porch swing, although this was outdoors, and they even filmed it in some of the documentaries. You know, like it's not really connected to a porch, but it's similar to that. He fell off, the swing went forward as he fell off, and then he sat up, and the swing was coming backward, and it hit him in the forehead, and this head injury, they believe, affected his personality, his temperament. But those aren't the major things that really led to the destructive tendencies that Aleksandr Pichushkin would experience later in life. He would go on to develop his violent tendencies as a response to bullying. He was heavily bullied at school, and later in his teen years, he developed a fascination with weightlifting, bodybuilding. Things like that are very popular in Russia, but one of the reasons is he wanted to appear strong so that other people wouldn't want to fight him because he had been beaten up a lot at school. And in the original upload, I made a comment that somebody from Russia had told me that Pichushkin means small parsley, like that's the literal translation of his name. But I was watching a documentary clip that is available here on YouTube. I believe it's from the channel Luscious 1983, and it's just about 9 minutes long, but very informative clip on the chessboard killer Aleksandr Pichushkin. And there's a doctor in that one who said that in Russian, his name literally, it's very similar to the word Pichushka, which means a small person. So the kids at school would bully him because of the similarity in his name to that word. And I think you can get the idea from that one. But I don't speak Russian, so I'm relying on their translations. When it comes to other things that Aleksandr Pichushkin experienced in life, at the conclusion of our first upload on him, I made the comment that I was rather surprised that he was only 44 years old at the time, and now he is 46 because we did one last year. He's only 46 years old, and I was like, wow, I was really quite surprised to note that how young he is because he has been incarcerated since 2006. But he started his criminal behaviors, like his reign of terror, his years of activity as a serial killer began at the age of 18. They began in his teen years at the age of 18. And since we did our last one, I mean, some of the new things that we've learned about serial killers is with all types of criminal behavior, for males, there is a spike in creativity in the brain that goes on from the ages of 16 to 25. Dr. Jordan Peterson talks about this very clearly. Ages 16 to 25, you'll find a spike in male creativity, as well as a spike in male criminal behavior. It's almost a pure correlation between the spike in creativity and the spike in criminal behavior. In short, men who are age 16 to 25 experience lots of criminal behavior. I even got into some trouble in the law at age 20, almost at the zenith of that time frame. And I actually had the experience of, like, after the age of 25, once I turned 26, I was almost like everything zen. And I'd be very curious what other men would say about this, about, like, did you encounter any types of deviant behavior from the ages of 16 to 25 and then have a very big mellowing out period after the age of 26? I'd be really curious if any men would like to drop their stories in the comments section below. Please feel free to share anything. But another thing that Aleksandr Pichushkin wanted to do was he took up playing chess, also very popular in Russia. He would play chess in the park. And they said that even if he was drunk on vodka, he could still maintain focus on the game. He could still be a successful chess player, even if he was completely drunk. Aleksandr Pichushkin is known to us as the Chessboard Killer because of that reason. He took a chessboard and he set it up as almost a trophy collecting mechanism for the people that he would murder. Most of the people he murdered with blunt force trauma using a hammer, but you'll see very clearly that there are some other examples, and we'll say something very big about that in a second. But he sets up this chessboard with 64 squares, and he has the goal to murder 64 people, one for each square on the chessboard. First, he wrote the numbers down on each one, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 64. And after somebody had been murdered, he would place an item on that square, usually something small like a coin. And when they found the chessboard, 61 spaces were murdered. He was 3 murders shy of completing his criminal masterpiece. And the thing to say about that is, Aleksandr Pichushkin unleashed a reign of terror that went on for almost 15 years. And as you heard, he allegedly, possibly murdered 61 people. But one of the things is he would dispose of some of the bodies in the sewer system in a place called Bitsa Park. As I said, he's known as the Chessboard Killer, but another name for him is the Bitsa Maniac. And I think it's actually Bitskevsky Park, but it's also referred to as Bitsa Park, B-I-T-S-A, and he is referred to as the Bitsa Maniac as well. And he would dispose of some of the bodies into the sewer system. At a certain point, Pichushkin started doing something different. He would take a vodka bottle or another type of bottle, and after striking his victim with the hammer, he would then insert the bottle into the skull so people would find the bodies not in the sewer system, but laying flat on the ground, and then they would have the bottle sticking out of the skull. It became a new signature. And with something like that, I think they said this in one of the documentaries, and I forget what exactly one it was called, like something just to the effect of the Chessboard Killer. It's available here on YouTube. YouTube has no shortage of serial killer documentaries. It really is something amazing. But when they're talking about that, it's like they said something that I was thinking, my first instinct. He was trying to get caught. But why? Especially, why would somebody try to get caught? Well, I find that there are two things with serial killers. Number one, you find that there's often this person who just wants to feed this diabolical urge that they have to kill people. But another thing you find is that they also want out. They know that they have these urges that are uncontrollable. Some serial killers want out of it, or they want to put an end to whatever sort of destructive cycle that they are in. But with Pichushkin, I think it's almost into a third category where he would have committed these murders and he wanted to show that he could become the most prolific serial killer in Russia. Aleksandr Pichushkin idolized an individual named Andrei Chikatilo, the butcher of Rostov. Once again, we aren't necessarily sure how many people he murdered. It's perhaps 52 or 53. And thereabouts. And what Aleksandr Pichushkin wanted to do was he wanted to choose the chessboard as a way to keep his trophy mementos and keep track of the murders for a very particular reason. He wanted to become Russia's most prolific serial killer. So with the 64 spaces on the chessboard, that would mean that he would have murdered more people than Andrei Chikatilo. And Chikatilo operated up until the late 90s. I believe he was executed around, 1992 or 91 or 92. It was around the fall of the Soviet Union when Chikatilo was executed to a single gunshot to the back of the head. I actually started learning about Pichushkin years ago because of Andrei Chikatilo. Somebody sent me a documentary about him, and I like I learned about him, and then some of the related links on the side led me to Aleksandr Pichushkin. We go through phases in life, and I went through a very big serial killer phase in my early 20s, talking about that spike in creativity and deviant behavior. But yes, indeed, I wanted to learn more about serial killers and how they function, so I would watch loads of serial killer documentaries. As I said, they're very easy to find on the internet. And one of them that I did come across was Aleksandr Pichushkin. So he has this fascination with Chikatilo, the butcher of Rostov. And also, serial killers very frequently tend to be underachievers. There's somebody who believes that they are very intelligent. They are somehow, in some way, superior to other people, but they're just not getting the recognition that they deserve. And they believe that this is one possible motivation for Aleksandr Pichushkin to start leaving the bodies more carelessly. And once again, these are mostly in Bitsa Park. And the reason why is because it's a very wide open area. They said 22 square kilometers. It's very, even if they're staking out the area, it's a very wide open piece of land. So once he's dumping the bodies, it's not easy for them to catch the person who's just moving around in the dark. But the thing is, though, it's that he wanted to show that he was very capable of doing something. He wanted to create this as a criminal masterpiece and then share it with the world. As far as dumping the bodies in the park, I think this serves two purposes. And this is after going through some of the documentary footage that is available online. That 9-minute clip from Luscious 1983, I mean, that was just simply fascinating stuff. But it's he wants to show that he can hide the bodies, but also that the forest becomes a place of safety for him. He operates in this area because it's easy for him to sneak around. It's easy for him to disappear behind a tree, into the bushes. There are lots of places in which he can move. So there's actually something that goes on in the brain where he begins to think that, oh, if I operate in this way, this is my refuge. This is the place where I need to go. This is the place where I need to dump the bodies. So this becomes his familiarity. And in addition to saying that, I would like to add one thing. Aleksandr Pichushkin primarily murdered his individuals by striking them with blunt force trauma, particularly using a hammer. But there are other things, like he dropped somebody off of a building once, he shot one person. This whole thing about a serial killer only sticking to one method, you'll find this very frequently discussed throughout the serial killer literature. They find one method and then they determine that this is the method that I'm going to use. What do we have to say about that? Because every time you look into a serial killer, it really appears that they're doing something that is contrary to that. They're doing something that is quite different to that. They're always deviating from the pattern. They're always deviating from their preferred method. And with Pichushkin, I think there's a very good reason for that, because he wanted to create this criminal masterwork. He was the chessboard killer. He wanted to be known as the chessboard killer. So he would go for practicality, he would go for convenience, and he wanted to do things not to satiate an urge 100%. I'm sure he definitely had urges and desires to kill people, but not 100%. He also is doing this because of cold, methodical, and calculating behavior. He wants to murder 64 people so that he could become Russia's most notorious serial killer. So I think that all of these things are lining up rather easily. All of these things are lining up in conjunction, and that all of these things come together very, very clearly with somebody like Aleksandr Pichushkin deviating from the patterns and such. And another thing we should note about Aleksandr Pichushkin is he also murdered both men and women. I mean, they say that serial killers operate within their own sexual orientation, right? That also seems to be something that is horribly inconsistent, and I think the reason for that is rather clear. He's not doing this only to satiate the urges. He's also doing this to complete the 64 murders, the chessboard killer, and to be known as the chessboard killer. But the thing is, though, because he dumped the bodies in the sewer, they weren't able to recover all of the remains, and it shows that they weren't able to identify all 61 murders that he claimed, so he didn't become Russia's most notorious serial killer. He was only charged and convicted on 48 of the murders, or they only had evidence for 48 of the murders, and Aleksandr Pichushkin was sentenced to life in prison. and he is still currently in prison at the time of this recording. There was an individual, a journalist in one of the documentaries, that did say something, though, about Pichushkin when she talked about how he had this type of dangerous energy, or it's like this type of dangerous desire that he is chasing. And I think that that is a very good way to really talk about the serial killer, like dangerous energy, because you often wonder, people are talking about these urges that they have. They're talking about the dark passenger, or what was that thing that BTK called? Something like Persona X or something like that, that was driving them to kill. And when you actually just think of that as like the dark and dangerous energy, that's really what it is. I mean, many people often find that they get urges for sex, but this person is getting urges to do very destructive things, and they are acting upon them without consequence. And one of the points that by the way, that 9-minute video that I mentioned, it is in Russian, but there are subtitles on Luscious 1983. And what they're showing is they're showing Aleksandr Pichushkin being interrogated, and they're trying to really reinforce the point that he shows no remorse for the killings. But they described it as no emotion, and that would be a point where I would disagree. I think Aleksandr Pichushkin is a very emotional individual, and when you watch the videography from his trial, he appears to be a very emotional individual. But the big thing to say about him is that it's emotions in terms of, expressing something. He can express his own feeling, but that's just it. It's just his own feeling. Does he have any remorse or regard for the people that he murdered? No, absolutely not. And one of the points we should also talk about is that the way in which Aleksandr Pichushkin would get his victims into the park, he didn't just sneak up on people. What he would do is he would tell them that, he meets somebody, he strikes up a conversation, and then he tells them that his dog has passed away, and he asks them if they'll come into the park with him to have a drink at the spot where he buried his dog as a way of mourning, as a way to help him cope with the fact that he buried his dog. And the point that I heard Pichushkin say was that he always offered them the drink, always invited them somewhere in the secluded area and offered them the drink, usually in mourning for his dog. But, of course, it's obviously not true. And then he would assault the person and then murder them. But one of the things that we should also say is that one of Aleksandr Pichushkin's victims that he dumped into the sewer survived. She was in the sewer for 20 hours, and then she got out and was able to tell the police what happened. Hey, this man attacked me. And still, they weren't able to catch the guy. And the thing that I remembered from way back when was the police in Russia simply said that was an embarrassing move on the role of the police. One of his victims survived. She said, this man attacked me. He lured me into the park and he pushed me into the sewer, and she survived, but they still weren't able to find the guy. And one of the points that I would say about that is, which documentary was it? They said that Aleksandr Pichushkin was not captured by the police because he was extremely lucky. I disagree with that wholeheartedly. It's not necessarily that he was extremely lucky. It's because they botched the investigation. It's because the police officers involved made very costly errors. It's because the police officers and the investigators and everybody who's supposed to be trying to catch the guy made very vital mistakes in this one. And right now, I would actually like to give a shout out to YouTube user Yannick Benespedes, who shared something with me. And this is from a musical, like someone has composed an operetta called 61 to 64. And I would it's a song that you can hear on YouTube. And it was put up by Valentin Rukabeer, Ruckebier. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Rukabeer. And I would actually just like to read you the lyrics of the composition. Yes, I am. Liberty to take away whatever I want. Feeling the ants prickling under my conscience. Listen to them. Feed them. Bury them in the park. I adore that corner of the park. The sweetness and fragrance of metal, romantic color of roses, the liquid of life, and always one square further. I am playing chess against my conscience. Yes, I am. Only 4 more. Then I've reached my goal. a new chessboard, murder, and never regret. Death is only a transition, a portal. Marina number 61. Beneath the stars, I reveal my hauntingly beautiful face. But the earth is victorious. And once again, that is from Valentin Rukabir, and from a composition that was created in August of 2015. You can hear the operetta song on YouTube here, 61 to 64. And somebody shared that with me as well. So I think that's where we're going to have to leave our discussions on Aleksandr Pichushkin. You have him known as the chessboard murderer, the Bitsomaniac, the person who wanted to commit 64 murders to create a criminal masterpiece and share with the world. But he was only convicted on 48 of the murders, so he didn't become known as Russia's most infamous serial killer. And what do you have to say at all about anything related to serial killers, anything associated with Aleksandr Pichushkin, Andrei Chikatilo, Russian serial killers, anything you'd like to contribute in the comments section below? And as we mentioned, this was something that was requested by one of the listeners. So if you have anything that you would like to hear about, one more time, you can drop your suggestions in the comments section below, and we will try to get to them. All right, well, that's all for me now. If you like this upload, you can hit the like button. It really helps out the channel. And see you on Instagram for the bonus podcast. Until next time.